Hi everybody, welcome to our session. We're talking about the student experience of university as a learning community, and we'll explain a little bit more about what we mean by that. But just to let you know, this session is being recorded, but because it's a debate or really a discussion session where we want you to ideally put your mics on and your cameras on and talk to us, we're not going to send it out as is. So we're doing something called an edited highlights package at the end, which makes it sound more jazzy than it really is. But basically, we're going to collect the best bits and put it together. So if after the session you've said something you wish you hadn't, that's okay. Just let me know and we can edit that bit out. Okay. So if we do introductions then, I'll let Leona start.
Hello, I'm Leona. I'm a third-year criminology with psychology student. And also I'm a front runner at the position of mentoring engagement coordinator. So I've been invited to come here and also kind of talk about my experiences with how online learning has been for me and how it impacts the sense of a community.
Thanks, Leona. Omar?
Hello guys, my name's Omar. I'm Leona's colleague. I'm also a front runner for the Dare to Be Mentoring scheme, and yeah, I'm just here to asking questions or answer some things about the scheme.
Thanks, Omar. I'm Bev Hancock-Smith. I work in the class team, Centre for Learning and Study Support. My interest around this idea of university as a learning community comes from the mentoring side of my work. So part of my role is looking after mentoring, Dare to Be mentoring, but also mentoring across the institution. And that's how that ties in loosely with what we're talking about today. Jason?
Thanks, Bev. I'm Jason Eyre. I'm one of Bev's colleagues in the class team. I too come to this with some background in mentoring and supporting mentoring, and also in terms of the work that I do supporting writing communities across de Montfort. And my academic background is philosophy, so I take a philosophical interest in the idea of communities and what it means to learn as part of a community. So that's where my interests lie.
What we're going to try and do in the less than 50 minutes we've got together is to think broadly about learning as a community, as the idea that it's more than just coming to university to impart and receive knowledge and come out with a qualification. It's building this sense of community and this sense of learning that happens at all different levels, peer-to-peer learning, informal learning. And that if that is a thing, which we're hoping you'll agree it is, then think about what happens when the place where that community lives is taken away and we're in a virtual world. What does that do to the community? And then finally, we'll think about, well, what's our role in curating, facilitating, creating these spaces for this community to happen in a different way. And just to manage expectations, we haven't got the answers here. That's why this is a debate, this is a discussion. We're hoping that we can share ideas with everybody here about what works and what we feel we should be doing to support our students. If we start off thinking about learning broadly as a community, and I'm going to hand over to Jason for this part.
Okay, so I guess what we'd like you to think about is, I mean, I'm sure you have thought about it before, is, if you like, the broader aims of a university. I mean, the keynote sort of brought out some of that. But what I'm particularly interested in, and what we are kind of where we're coming at this from, is from this idea that the university is more than the sum of its parts in terms of an environment in which learning takes place. So there's a few provocative quotes there in the slides, and they are provocations, I suppose, to get you to sort of to think about things. And they've been selected, I guess. Some of the names may be or may not be familiar, but the Blanchot quote, the very first one, really kind of sums up this idea that we're sort of driving towards. When he says that what I'm thinking I've not thought all alone. And it's kind of an obvious thing to say in the context of university, that there's that we stand on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. That we read that, great works, and we engage with great thought, and we work off each other. In more kind of precise terms, I suppose, one of the things that we do is we impart a curriculum around disciplines, professions and academic disciplines, which have kind of global reach. These are communities that are not localized. They are global communities, and that we've become part of. But it's more than that too. We have an environment in which we learn, not all of which is, if you like, governed by the formal curriculum. And one of the things, I mean, I'm sure we'll get onto this in our discussion. One of the things that we've found over the last year or so is that that community is often, the learning that takes place in that community is often informal and relies on sort of non-orchestrated events and interactions. I mean, there's a quote there from Bandura about the way we learn things. Some of that learning is inadvertent. It's not something that we've programmed in. It's not based on a learning outcome. And there's a couple of quotes that speak to kind of Benjamin's idea about mimicry and mimesis. This idea that we learn, if you like, by example and through example in terms of practices or content knowledge, so to speak. But a lot of that learning takes place by sort of normativity, I suppose, seeing how others act and react and respond to one another. And so what we have as a university then is a community that has a spatial location in a particular space, but also has global reach in terms of the disciplines and a societal function. And we can argue until the cows come home about what that ought to be. But one of the things that's sort of, I guess, true to our experience is that we interact and we intersect with other people, and there's an informality in terms of a lot of the learning that we do. And I guess I just wanted to open it up to those of you who've come along today to participate in this discussion, as to what you thought of that, and whether you feel that you have other things to add to what I've said. Whether you agree or disagree, or whether I've missed some sort of nuance, and you can add it into the chat, but you can also feel free to maybe put your hand up or just talk into your mic, and we can get a discussion going. Zara.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting place to kind of start the discussion, because I think universities have potentially got a function in kind of countering the discourse around individualism. I don't know how far we actually achieve that. I think we probably, in many ways, if you look at sort of, marketing campaigns that happen within universities, from, let's say, kind of personal development elements of universities or career services, etc., often they are inadvertently buying into that kind of individualist perspective. It's kind of about you and your performance and how you achieve, and the whole structure of kind of assessment, etc., individual marks, competition, the graduate market. But I think that universities can have a role to play in, and this links perhaps to the keynote that we've just heard, how do we counter that narrative of your experience here on the planet is all about you and how you get on? Or is not about that, rather, and is much more about us and how we create connections to others and how we support others and develop as a society.
No, I would agree. I think that's very insightful. I mean, the way you frame that as if you like, a counterweight to the individualization, I suppose, and we do tend to, education, broadly speaking, all the way through, does tend to focus on individuals, doesn't it? That individuals are the ones that are assessed. You're assessed as an individual. You become the unit of learning, and as a consequence, particularly when we talk about consumerism and the commercialization of higher education in particular, you have the idea that the learning, the things that you learn, becomes unitized itself. You can sort of slice things into deliverables, and it sort of feeds into that. And I think what you're kind of driving at there is that there's a degree to which, you know, in your comments you talk about the we. You know, there is no, without the we there is no I. And you know, perhaps over the last 12 months or so, the sense of we has been challenged, and we're beginning to perhaps see it in a tighter focus.
Okay, we've got some more comments coming in. So Kinga's saying that it's a basic definition of language is that it's a set of symbols used by a given community for communication. There is a community in each individual, and some need more social interactions than others, but being deprived of that is a choice. And obviously it's the situation that we're unwittingly in, and that might link to the next slide, which I will put up, which we all got very excited about when we looked at it yesterday, because the students in an actual lecture theatre, and they're near each other and they're less than 2 meters apart, and they're talking and interacting and learning informally from each other, passing on knowledge, receiving knowledge in a way that's not formulaic or formulated by the curriculum. It's the informal interactions that really, as lecturers, as university staff, all we had to do for this to happen was to provide a space in which students could just be together and share and learn from each other. Obviously now that space has gone, and we are left with this. We're left with individuals working in isolation without the space that allows that conversation and that learning to take place. And that's when I'd like to sort of bring in Omar and Leona on this, because this is their experience. They moved from this lovely world of DMU where we were allowed to be together to this. And I think from a student perspective, it's really interesting to hear how that feels as an individual, but also how that impacts their feeling of being part of a wider community. And sorry, there's a hand up there, isn't there? So whose hand is up? It's sorry, I can't see that. Do you want to pop your mic on? Is it? Oh, Leona, there you go. Pop your mic on and your camera. There we go. And Omar, if you want to pop your mic and camera on as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to start because I think this is a really interesting topic, especially because since I'm doing psychology, obviously we have learned about Bandura and the social theories, social learning theories, and I think it's very interesting how important it is to actually interact with others in order to learn. And because we had to switch to online learning and so many things are different, as you said, Bev, you don't provide the physical space for us students to gather in anymore. It's I think it's also important to still continue that development of the communities to remain in touch with others. So I would like to note that for me personally, these communities, especially outside of academic settings, so outside of my usual curriculum, let's say, have been most important than ever. So even whether it's some student-led communities such as societies, or if it's in the bigger sense of like mentoring, where I would still interact with others and still learn. And it's still such a big part in my life, because if I was left alone to just be with, for example, other students, I don't think I would get all the necessary experience or advice that I would usually get when I was on campus. So I think that's one point to mention.
Omar, do you want to come in here as well and talk about informal learning? Because I know that you had a study group, didn't you?
Yeah, so in the physical sense, we are very much deprived. It's not we are by ourselves, but we found these new ways of kind of communicating with each other. And we were doing an assignment the other day, and even though we're in our rooms and wherever you are, we're still together. There's that sort of camaraderie, as we were talking about earlier today. There is that sort of togetherness about the whole thing. Like we're still talking to using mics and whatever, but you can't see them. They're not actually there. They could be as far away as Croatia, as some of us are. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I feel like even our front runner position, so because we're connected by this idea of mentoring and obviously our roles, but still it allows us to actually connect, and it allows us to share these experiences. Even now, like, I'm not sure I would be at this conference if it wasn't for this community that we've actually created. Obviously, it's not as like organically created as maybe some other, for example, a student study sessions would be. However, it's still interesting because we're all here today. There's many people here. So even though, despite the pandemic, despite all these other circumstances, we're all here today. And we're here, and even in this session currently, we're all learning from each other. So I think that's just an amazing thing.
Can I pick up on that? You know, the thing that kind of links what you two are saying in a way is that, in many senses, you know, the kinds of things that you're talking about, Omar, you know, study groups online and things, those sorts of things existed before the pandemic. You know, that these are sort of, you know, capabilities that we've had for quite some time, you know, in terms of networked and communities and so on. But just picking up on what Leona was saying about the organic nature of the interaction. I mean, when you set up a study group, as Leona pointed out, you know, you're controlling who's in and who's out, and you have, if you like, control over the interaction to some extent. You know, who gets to speak and who's invited in. I'm just kind of wondering what your experience. I mean, you're third-year students, and so you've had a couple of years, or a year and a half, was it, before pandemic struck. What kind of difference is there in the quality of the experience? You know, what Benjamin is saying, just to flesh out what I mean here. What Benjamin sort of talks about is this idea of happenstance. You know, these chance encounters that you just happen upon, or, you know, happen to see, or happen to kind of come across, or overhear in a library, for example, someone talking about something. How is that sort of experience? You know, you've got both sides of that experience. Do you feel that something's missing from that, or, I mean, it's a bit of a leading way of saying it, but do you feel how do you feel about that difference, that opportunity to mingle?
I would say I love going into university. I love going to the library. I love going to the uni club because I like. It gives me a sense of motivation because I know other people are going to be there as well, so I can bounce ideas off and stuff like that. But when you're in a room and you're cut off, yes, you can communicate with other people, but it's not the same. And I can't describe it. So how do I describe that? It's just it's so strange. It's just not it's not the same feeling. It's not the same feeling because I don't know. I can't quantify it.
I think we're all with you on this, Omar. I think there's lots of agreement, and we're all kind of nodding away, going, "Yeah, we all miss that."
Yeah.
It's unquantifiable, isn't it? What is that difference of us being physically near each other?
There's a sense that anything could happen in a way. Sorry to interrupt, Bev. I think there's, you know, in terms of the struggling to find that language, I think there's something of the carnivalesque, which makes it sound like there's, you know, people with clown makeup on and things, but there's a sense that you can kind of you don't know what's going to happen next in a way. Everything's kind of open when you walking into a library. You know, who knows what will happen next. But do you know what I mean? There's that sense of openness, whereas everything is kind of circumscribed now, isn't it? You know, I've got this particular thing at a particular time. I've got a lecture here. I've got a lecture there. It's kind of regimented, and you don't have that sort of chance encounter. You don't happen to see something in the corner. You can't have those little conversations to the side. Everyone here in this room may well be on little side channels with, you know, WhatsApp or whatever, talking about things. But the chance to kind of lean over and ask someone, and you know, all of those kinds of things, it's sort of missing, isn't it?
I think we've got
Leona,
a few
you've
hands
got your
there.
hand up there. Leona's got her hand up, and then
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt because I think those are all just amazing points. But in that sense as well, I do want to bring up the other side, which for me has been present as well, and that is the fact that transferring to online learning and just the whole university experience being online, it has allowed me to actually even try some more things. For example, one example I can think of is the fact that I have joined more societies. So actually, whilst I'm kind of isolated from everyone because I'm not at the university, I am also, I have gotten myself involved in more social gatherings. So I have met more people. I have done, I have done much more than maybe I would when I was on campus. So whilst there are no chance encounters, as you said, Jason, I think it's important that we recognize the fact that there are still opportunities for people to experience new things, and maybe even maybe they're doing so at a bigger comfort because they're just at home. They're not actually going to a new place. They're not actually expected to, I don't know, behave a certain way. I know for me, because I struggle with some anxiety, so it's just it's different when I'm attending something for the first time in person and when I'm attending something virtually. So I think that has also like showed me that it's okay to try new things, if nothing else.
Omar, did you want to come in with on that point?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. So I was picking out, you said that you've strived more on the social aspect of things because we can't, you know, go out as we normally would. Is that, am I correct in saying that?
I suppose, because there are benefits to both meeting people in person and online, so
Yeah.
it's just different. However, I have found that for in some instances, for example, when joining new societies, it was actually perhaps even better in some senses, because it allowed me to meet new people, and it wasn't I wasn't in a room filled with many people that I don't know. It was just a screen, so it's different in that sense.
Andrew's made a point that probably pulls into that a little bit, because obviously Leona and Omar, in your third year, you've kind of had the hybrid, haven't you? You've had the experience of on campus and now this.
Yeah.
Andrew's made a really good point further back in the chat that creating a community will pose a different challenge for new students this year. It's easier for second and third years as they've had some foundation with fellow students pre-pandemic, but some first years have told them they've met nobody at all. So I guess it's different experiences for different students, but it kind of links on to what is our role in this then, if we as educators, as you know, as an institution, are there to support students, to provide learning opportunities, and some of those things happen through happenstance, through chance meetings. Where's our role in this? How formal or informal should these opportunities be? And that's something that perhaps Leona and Omar, you might want to discuss. Do you want us to make certain spaces, virtual spaces, for these kind of informal things to happen, or is the very nature of us meddling and getting involved mean it's not organic and it's not coming from you?
I think I think it'll be brilliant to have these little virtual spaces for people, for students to socialize in, because I think some people might enjoy that, but on the other side, there might be other students that might enjoy, the real thing, actual, like talking to actual people in the same physical space. So it's, but I do think to not provide the virtual space is to deny other students. I think it's a very good option.
I would say that it's a really interesting question to even ask, and I think it's a very important question to ask because obviously, if anything, this pandemic has taught everyone that we actually have to look towards different and inclusive ways of communicating with people and in a way establishing and keeping these communities alive. So I would say that it could be useful if even staff at the university provided these opportunities for students to talk and gather and just have some sort of informal gatherings. However, there is always the point where some students are also either shy, they don't want to put their cameras on or anything like that. So there is always the case of that. However, just in my lectures, I have seen that as time goes by, more people are comfortable with using their microphones. More people are interacting in these online sessions. And even though it's not the same as organizing a separate event, I think a lot of students would really appreciate if staff was more involved, especially whether it's student support. So again, something that's more formal, but even if it's just kind of like a casual chat or anything that gives the sense of just community. Again, we go back to that word, and I think that's really what I think everyone should be focusing on. Just the people coming together and trying to support each other, and whether that's staff or students, I wouldn't really say it matters, because students are going to gather in informal settings anyway. So if a staff could also get involved and then, also provide some support, or even just have a casual chat just for the staff to get to know the students actually attending this university. So I think that's something worth thinking about.
Omar?
Yeah, I couldn't say that better myself. I think you've got plenty of examples of these different modes of communication, because you have, like this, we're talking to you on Teams right now.
Yeah.
I'd imagine in a pre-COVID setting, we'll be in some form of panel. I'd imagine, or something like that. So this is it proves that it works 100%. I mean, we have people talking to us in the comment section and on the microphones. You have other things like Discord as well, which is slightly more informal for students.
But interesting, we've had to curate this space, haven't we? So this has all been set up.
Yes.
So it's that kind of sense of curation and facilitation that's kind of a balance. You're right. This is a space for us all to be here, but we had to set it up, and it's that balance between those things is interesting. I wonder if anybody who's attending wants to share if they've experienced anything in their particular departments or curriculums or things they've been doing to try to facilitate or recreate those moments that would happen organically in labs or in lecture theatres. And if you've managed to find a way to do that on Teams, on Blackboard, Padlet, and any other way that kind of simulates what we used to have in real life. It'd just be nice to hear. You put your mic on or type into the chat box.
While you're thinking or typing, just to pick up on Leona's point there about, if you like, we do draw a distinction between staff and students, you know, and we sort of withdraw from each other a little bit. And I think, Leona, what you're sort of getting at there is there's a degree to which it doesn't matter to some extent that we share something in common, even if I'm a member of staff, I might teach, you're a student, you might learn, or we teach and learn from each other in a way, don't we?
Exactly.
And, there's a few more provocative quotes. If you've got time to read them all, the extensive reading list on request. I think in some talking to members of staff in particular, I think, you know, there's a sense that sometimes we feel that we have nothing to offer. You know, we have no experience of the pandemic that we can share with you because we're experiencing it for the first time too. Likewise, you know, in terms of how best to make use of the technologies, the information communications technologies, well, we probably wouldn't think that we have much to offer, you know, particularly younger, you know, chronologically younger people who we might assume are more used to these kinds of environments. You know, where we've set up, you know, Blackboard in the past, Blackboard chat groups for, you know, placement students to talk, and nobody uses them because they're all talking to each other on their own sort of native platforms. So there is there can be rather a sense of sort of shrugging the shoulders and hopelessness on the part of academic staff and administrators that, you know, perhaps we don't have anything to offer because the students can kind of sort it out themselves. But what I would say, and sort of picking up on what Leona's sort of saying there, is that I think we do have something to offer. I mean, we have not necessarily answers, but perhaps ways of approaching the questions that doesn't hinge on our sort of status as, you know, senior members of the community, but really it just hinges on the fact that we are part of that community. The quotes I've got there about maturity and immaturity and majority and immature and minority, and these are concepts that Dewey and Stiegler use to talk about that kind of the way societies, individuals and societies, renew each other and intersect with one another, not in a way that reproduces the past, but in a way that permits it to mutate in a viral kind of way and adapt and adopt. And I think it's that intergenerational exchange potentially that creates new opportunities for the world, and particularly our world as we're part of it. But I'm really pleased that you kind of picked up on that sort of idea, Leona, that there's you know, that as members of community, we sort of all have a responsibility to participate in it to some extent. And it isn't simply about I set something up for the students and I walk away, or we just leave the students to do it on their own. So, yeah, I should stop talking now.
We've got a hand up from Zara. So Zara, do you want to put your mic on?
I don't know. Sometimes it's better if I leave it off, to be honest. But yeah, I was thinking about, and it connects with what John's just said in the chat thread there, is this idea of formality and informality of the kind of gathering of people together in the virtual space. Because I know from my own experience that I don't go to the tea and biscuits chats that are run by the library. I work for the library. I don't go to those because I've never been, so I'm prejudging, but you know, that's what we're doing when we're deciding how to spend our time. But I'm thinking I've got too much to do. I'm too busy. It doesn't feel focused. But I do go to book groups, reading groups that the research group I'm part of run. And also I go to writing sessions as well, or at least I did when I was completing a piece of writing previously, that have a focus. So I think, you know, if we are going to stick our oar into students' social spaces and try and curate them in some way, then I guess what we can bring that perhaps is helpful, or this is the question really, is this helpful, is a focus of some sort. And that's not to pitch in and say, well, I'm the expert on this, but to just create, to do it in a more facilitative way, to say, well, this is an interesting topic, and what can we all learn about this by talking to each other, which in many ways should be the role of a lecturer anyway, shouldn't it? So that was kind of my point. And I think, you know, John's comment in the chat thread there about year 3's engaged with a coffee and catch up, but year 1 and 2 didn't. And perhaps that's because the year 3's already have that relationship and wanted to see each other, which is a different thing, isn't it, than trying to create a community that have never physically met each other. I mean, the year 2's probably have, but anyway, but not for long, I suppose, because we were off campus in March. Anyway.
Yeah, and anecdotally, that's what I've experienced with breakout groups. If I've ever put students in breakout groups, when it gets to year 3's and you pop into each of the breakout groups to spy on them, they've put their cameras on and they're talking and they're interacting because they've that relationship, that community was already built physically before that. When I've done it with first years, nobody's put their cameras on. Mics are very rarely on, and they're all using the chat box. So you're right that it does link back to kind of the foundation on which that relationship has been formed, and how that then translates into a virtual space or not. Leona, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I would say it relates to what the chat is also talking about at the moment, but also from Jason's point before. I think, you know, even though a lot of staff might feel a bit hopeless and as if they're not, as if students have got everything, so like as if like they don't need you anymore, if that's right, like what I got from you, Jason. I think that's not the case, because it's still very important for students to actually have someone either with experience or someone who would rather know how to guide us into just doing the best we can, because I feel like no one has this experience with the pandemic. No one has actually experienced this, like long quarantine, everything is online, we're all trying to do the best we can, and it's very, I would say it's very different. However, I think it's still extremely important for staff to keep in touch with students, whether it's the library staff who don't or the library and learning services staff who don't have this like day-to-day kind of interactions with students, like with the same students, I mean. I think it's very important to still get engaged as much as possible, because then you also might get students who will tell you, oh, this session actually meant a lot to me. Oh, this actually explains it better, or any kind of interaction, I think, supports both parties, whether like it's the staff or students. So when, even though it's different when staff actually lead a certain community, a certain session, I think it's very beneficial when staff does this, because it allows students to actually get involved as well, and to actually show, even show initiative, show interest, but also it allows students to get the kind of support maybe they wouldn't get from peers. Once again, I would just like to go back to the mentoring aspect. Like, mentoring is extremely important, I would say, and whether it's formal or informal, even peer mentoring, that is actually like very, very beneficial. However, learning from someone who has more experience, but let's say is a staff member at the university or else, I think it provides extremely valuable insight or advice, or just allows us students to actually get some sort of direction, and then we don't feel so lost. That's my experience.
I think there is certainly value in that sort of interaction. I think some of the lecturers and academic staff in some of the chat have kind of pointed to some of the limitations of staff time and to engage at that level. And I think a lot of staff colleagues would very much like to engage more in some ways, but there are pressures, you know, on their roles in many cases that sort of prevent that from being a possibility, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I'm not quite sure. Everything's very curriculum driven, isn't it? Bev, did you want to kind of?
I wonder whether it's a good time to talk about. We're talking a little bit about staff and students coming together and the kind of the lines being blurred, and that kind of links into the writing groups. That I wanted to kind of end the session with. We already have this stuff happening to some degree, and it's how we can maximise. We're not having to reinvent the wheel. We can maximise what we're already doing in terms of the communities that we've set up. So on this side of the screen, it's going to be the writing communities. That Jason, if you want to talk, we've got 5 minutes left, very briefly too.
Yeah, of course. So I mean, this is kind of an example, and Zara raised this earlier. You know, it's an activity that crosses the generational bounds, as it were, and discipline bounds, because we're all engaged in some form of writing. You know, depending on what we're doing, we're still sort of sitting there writing, and as a practice, it's something that we can learn from each other, and it doesn't matter whether you're a first-year undergraduate student or a professor. You know, you're both going to be writing, and you both have some experience, perhaps, to impart to one another. And so we do have a writing circle that we meet every fortnight online. Prior to that, we met face-to-face in the Eric Wood building. But I've got to say, kind of echoing what Leona said earlier, that the participation is much better now that we're online. But it's one of those examples where we have kind of curated some community, and it is sort of reaching. It's directed at postgraduate research students and staff at the moment, but we are looking to bring in taught postgraduate students into the fold with the writing circle. There are other writing communities for undergraduate students as well. So we have the 500 Word Club alongside the writing group for research students, which is for PhD candidates. Yeah, and the 500 Word Club, which is for all students. And these are all examples, if you like, of curated online spaces that also have a physical correlate, you know, when we're on campus, that permit chance encounters. You know, you learn all sorts of things from each other about things that aren't necessarily things that you knew you wanted to learn until you've learned them.
And then on the more formalised approach, I suppose, would be our mentoring offer as well. So there's a number of mentoring schemes that students can take part in. Some of it's peer-to-peer mentoring, some of it's staff to student mentoring, but that's a more formalised approach of developing a community. We've got a question from Gabby, more about the 500 Word Club. Should I put the link into the? I'll put the link into the chat window. But Jason, do you want to talk to that a little bit while I get the link?
About the 500 Word Club.
Yeah.
So it's designed in the first instance and primarily as a response to, if you like, disability. So students who feel that they don't have a learning difference, but it is open to everyone because, you know, we're kind of following principles of UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And so it runs every week, I believe every week on a Friday in an online space. And the idea is that in the session that you sit and you write 500 words, and that there's someone else who can give you feedback on that and talk about the writing process as well. So yeah, we'll have a look at the link.
I'll pop the link
every Friday. Thank you, Kinga. Every Friday, 1 till 2, including today. So that's the premise of that.
And any other questions? Oh, thank you. As Kinga just put that in. Thank you, Kinga. Any other questions that people have about what we've spoken about, or questions they've got for Leona or Omar about We've got 1 more minute left, Jeff's saying. So any questions that you've got for Leona or Omar that we've not asked?
Well, hopefully we've started a conversation about these learning communities. Gabby.
Hi there. It's not really a question, just wanted to thank Leona and Omar for candidly speaking to us. It's always great to have insight to our students and how they're experiencing this particular situation. So thank you very much for that, and thanks very much for the conversation.
Oh, no worries. Listen, thank you for giving us the opportunity. I think this is a brilliant way to kind of, share these experiences.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for attending and listening.
That's a nice note to end on, I think. Well done, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll keep these conversations going, no doubt. We are doing work around learning communities through library and learning services, of which these mentoring and the writing group things are part of. So we'll obviously be in touch.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.